Men from every walk of life, scientists, statesmen, teachers, poets, and students, representatives from every civilized nation on earth were there to greet him. And yet, among all those present, there were none so famous and so revered as he himself. He had shown mankind the road to health. He had shown mankind the path to a greater freedom and a more generous life. He had opened another door of knowledge and truth and had shown the world a greater glory in the protection of the human body.
When Louis Pasteur discredited past theories with his experiments in the 1860s, his discovery confirmed the belief that bacteria was the motivation for infection. Furthermore, his findings on disease altered the direction of medical treatment, the momentum of death, and was deemed valuable wisdom for generations of new medical discoveries. In 1831, scientists and health officials were baffled by how a non-contagious disease could slaughter so many lives. The cholera epidemic traveled to London in 1853 and killed over 20,000 people. London at the time was described as crowded, polluted, and a worse sanitary state of things that cannot be more than that in a neighborhood coal yard. Nevertheless, scientists' only explanation for cholera was the traditional miasma theory, the theory that foul air or miasma from decaying matter is the origin of illness. Created back in the 4th century BC, Greeks and Romans described it as a contagious power that has an independent life of its own. However, the miasma theory was just a guess supported by the fact that cities were often polluted, but there was no better explanation for scientists to go with. That is, until 1854, when English scientist Dr. John Snow studied samples of water from sewer pipes and discovered white flecks floating in them. He suggested that all contaminated water pumps should be extracted from London, and because of that, the death rates from cholera dropped drastically. However, when Dr. Snow presented his evidence to the public of how a microorganism could be the motivation of infection, his ideas were overlooked. Throughout history, numerous amounts of germ theories have been applied to medical thinking, such as the humoral theory of disease or demotic theory. Regardless, scientists' most used and most popular germ theory is one by Aristotle, an ancient Greek philosopher. In 334 BCE, the spontaneous generation, the theory that germs spontaneously emerge from non-living matter, was based on the idea Aristotle established when he saw new fish in a puddle of water. In his philosophy, he quoted his ideas from this observation.
Of things that come to be, some come to be by nature, some by art, some spontaneously. But everything that comes to be, 1, comes to be by something, and 2, comes to be from something, and 3, comes to be something.
For centuries, the theory of the spontaneous generation was a controversial and overdue theory. However, there was a universal agreement that the spontaneous generation was the easiest theory to understand, even though it resulted in unsuccessful treatments, causing doctors to mostly rely on the human body and herbs to fight illnesses naturally. Enter German chemist Dr. Louis Pasteur. In 1854, he became a well-respected chemist after solving a wine crisis in 1856. In 1860, a discussion raged in the scientific community when an English naturalist wrote a book applauding the spontaneous generation. This topic of the French Academy of Science divided on the question, was spontaneous generation mere illusion? To gain their answer, the Academy proposed a cash prize for any scientist who could present the best proof for or against the spontaneous generation. So in 1861, Louis Pasteur became determined to end the discussion. To gain proper evidence for his investigation, Pasteur created an experiment based on a 17th century experiment that was the first study to go against the spontaneous generation. Pasteur developed his own evaluation called the swan neck flask experiment. First, he created 4 flasks that had long tubes shaped like an S and placed beef broth in each of them. Next, he used a process called pasteurization to sterilize the broth and kill any pre-existing bacteria. Then, sealed the tips of some of the flasks to block off any bacteria from getting in. Finally, he left the flasks alone for a couple weeks. When he came back, he was presented with spoiled broth and bacteria in the exposed flasks, but none of the sealed ones. He determined the process happened due to microorganisms in the air rather than the broth spontaneously appearing bacteria from the inside. To test this hypothesis, Pasteur traveled to Airbus in 1862 and exposed 20 flasks all over the local town. As he predicted, microorganisms appeared in the exposed broth and nothing appeared in the sealed broth. Pasteur realized since the bacteria was in the air when it spoiled the broth, he concluded the reason for disease must be the germs within the air, not the air itself. Pasteur created his germ theory of disease in 1864, the theory that diseases are caused by an invasion of microorganisms to the body. He presented his findings to the French Academy of Science and did not only receive a cash reward, but the eternal title as Father of Microbiology. He gave a series of speeches to different universities and concluded the era of spontaneous generation in 1865. In one of his speeches, he claimed,
"Never will the doctrine of the spontaneous generation recover from the mortal blow struck by this simple experiment."
After Pasteur published his germ theory of disease, the public began to take notice of their infectious lifestyle and switched to rehearsing personal hygiene. In addition, the British government got involved and invented the Public Health Act in 1875 to keep the public sanitation in check. Nevertheless, Pasteur used his germ theory of disease for his own medical discoveries, such as solving the silkworm crisis in 1868, discovering immunity in 1879, and creating a rabies vaccine in 1885. However, the germ theory did not only affect Pasteur's success. Other scientists understood the germ theory of disease and used it for their own discoveries. For instance, in 1840, Dr. Joseph Lister noticed that 45% of patients were dying from post-surgery complications. Working at Georgetown University, Lister came upon an article of the germ theory of disease. With the information how a microorganism is the result of infection, Lister created a carbolic acid spray that acted as a barrier between the cut and the bacteria. He performed his first successful surgery on August 12, 1865, leaving him the legacy as father of antiseptic surgery.
If we could dispense with the spray, no one would rejoice more than myself. But until someone wiser than I am can supply some better means, we must continue to use it.
Despite the triumph that the germ theory had on others, not everyone was supportive of this discovery. Many scientists tried to disprove the germ theory, but they all had the same common mistake: making research based on guesses that had no proper evidence. In particular, Dr. Antoine Béchat was a French chemist who had a bitter rivalry against Pasteur. In 1880, Béchat composed his own germ theory to go against Pasteur's. Béchat did many experiments to prove that his theory was correct, but he didn't provide significant evidence like Pasteur's. But not all Pasteur's enemies tried to bring down the germ theory disease. In fact, Dr. Robert Koch's efforts reinforced the ideas represented. Dr. Robert Koch was famously known for his discoveries on anthrax in 1876, but he and Pasteur were rivals due to Koch accusing Pasteur of cherry-picking his work on anthrax. Even though Pasteur and he were opponents, Koch realized the connection between the germ theory of disease and his work. This led him to the creation of Koch postulates, or rules that identify germs and their effects. After Koch published his postulates in 1890, supporters and non-supporters were finally convinced of the germ theory's presence, leaving old theories to die. In 1892, two scientists made the discovery of multiple copies of the same germ from affected leaves. They called the new germ viruses, when a series of germs made a copy of themselves to cause more damage. In the wake, the first germ panic began between 1900 to 1940. It was an era of major change when the germ theory was most useful. They placed posters in newspapers suggesting the many ways to avoid germs and where they could be, such as their food, water, air, or environment. In 1945, the first vaccine for the influenza virus was created. Between the decades 1960 and 1970, many vaccines and antibiotics were developed. These treatments will help upcoming outbreaks such as the 1981 AIDS and HIV pandemic, and would introduce a second germ panic to 1985 to the present time, the 2013 Ebola crisis, and recently the 2020 coronavirus pandemic. These deadly outbreaks reminded society of the social anxiety faced during the first germ panic and before the germ theory. We were reminded that deadly diseases do not come from foul air or nowhere but caused by germs. The government had to review and create new sanitation methods such as social distancing and hand washing. However, thanks to the germ theory of disease, scientists were able to create a vaccine to slow the spreading of COVID amongst citizens, saving many lives to this day. Ultimately, Louis Pasteur's discovery of the germ theory of disease impacted society by comprehending the worth of germs, the many ways they could spread, and help humanity overcome a major widespread illnesses, making this a turning point in history. With that, it also helped the human body become less vulnerable due to the creation of medical inventions and debunking scientists of any false ideas. The germ theory of disease is remembered today as the theory that remodeled medical thinking and saved the human race from microscopic events.